Chapter 14. Arguing with my father was something Trevor had always been happy to leave to me. The secret of his success, both as a son in law and a deputy managing director, was a degree of compliance he'd have called loyalty, and I'd have dismissed as servility. Back in May 1969, the last thing he'd have wanted to do was step even slightly out of line. It was clear from Tabitha's recollections, however, that he had nevertheless done so. The sudden announcement that he had to accompany Dad to Plymouth suggested his resistance hadn't lasted long, but dinner with a supplier, however inconvenient, was still too trivial a cause. There had to be more to it. According to Pam, they got back late, very late, and by the next morning everyone was on their best behaviour for Grand's party, so there was plenty to camouflage the disagreement, not least the scandal of my continuing absence. But still, it must have been there, simmering beneath the surface. Whatever Dad had asked of Trevor that night, it had nearly been too much, but not quite. And there was a weakness in Dad's refusal to have me buying off Tully, for I felt certain Tully was behind their dispute. And with Trevor as absorbed in self-pity as he was now, I had a good chance of finding out how. I let Pam and Tamara think I was going to my room for an early night when I left them, but a late one seemed altogether more probable. I went straight to my car and headed for Paranawurthal. At the Truemouth Hotel, I was told Trevor was out, but I parked beside his car, and without it, he wouldn't have gone far. The Norway Inn on the other side of the road looked a good bet. Sure enough, Trevor was there, propped on a stool at one end of the bar. As one who knew the sign wells from personal experience, I reckon he was halfway between drunk and very drunk. Head and shoulders swallowing, eyes bleary, the ashtray in front of him well filled. He winced as he took another gulp of lager, an extra strong brand, by the look of him. Hello, Trevor. Oh, God, he glared fuzzily at me. Can you leave me alone? Solitude doesn't seem to be doing you many favours. Well, it beats the alternative, believe me. He did his best to think for a moment. You can buy me another drink if you insist on staying. Carlsberg special. All right. There was no point arguing with him about it. That too I knew from personal experience. I ordered what he wanted and a fizzy water for myself, then sat on the stool next to his. How are things? You should know. I'll bet Pan told you in loving detail. She seems determined to press for a divorce. Yes, and I don't have much choice in the matter. Do I? Not while she has that damn photographs, which you promised to keep from her. I didn't promise anything. Besides, the fire at my workshop changed all that. You're not the only one to have suffered at Paul in Lucas's hands. No, well, I suppose that's some comfort, but don't you kid yourself. I believe it's why you let Pam have the picture back. You were never bothered about me. I'm not an AP, am I? Not a fully paid member of the authentic bloodline, so I could be hung out to dry whenever it suits Trevor. But I don't care, not anymore. I've had it with your family. Pam can have a divorce. She can have anything she wants except me on a plate. I'm off. I'm cutting the ties that bind. What do you mean? You think I'm going to sit it out here all winter while Pam bleeds me white? Think again. I have friends in sunnier climes. It's time I look them up. What friends are these? Better ones than you like to believe. He prodded my chest for emphasis, tilted the glass in his hands as he did so, and spilled lager down my shirt. I'll be welcome with open arms. Then he giggled, and legs. When do you leave? Sooner the better. There'll have to be a farewell drink for you and me, Chris. I'm far from sorry to say. Which reminds me, my glass is nearly empty. I bought him another lager and steadied his lighter for him, while he lit a cigarette to go with it. Before you rush off, Trevor, I ventured, there's a minor mystery you might be able to clear up for me. You mean why I married Pam in the first place? Well, I'll tell you, it was for her money, her grandmother's money, I suppose I should say, which I'm going to see precious little of now. It concerns Gran, certainly. Remember her 90th birthday party? Yeah, I do. But you don't, do you? You had a row with Dad the night before, did I? What was it about? He frowned wizardly at me. Why should you care? Something to do with Edmund Tully, was it? Shock registered dully on his face, and I knew I was on the right track. Dad bought him off, didn't he? Paid him to shut up about Michael Lanyon. But how were you involved, Trevor? What did he want you to do? Deliver the money or get Tully out of the country? Was that why you went to Plymouth? He looked at me a long time before responding. Why don't you ask the old man? I have. He denies everything. I bet he does. But I'm right now, aren't I? was to do with Tully. Maybe what was the deal? There wasn't one. There must have been, otherwise he wouldn't have dropped out of sight so obligingly. That's all you know. If I got it wrong, you have, as usual. Put me right then. Tell me what really happened. No can do. He took a large gulp of beer lager. Strictly no can do. Why not? He grinned crookedly. I don't think you're ready for the shock. Try me. The grin chilled. I preferred you as an alcoholic, Chris. It stopped you asking questions. A straight answer would do the same. Maybe it would. He leaned closer. Of course it was because you are an alcoholic. You didn't make it to the churro that day. If you had, yes. Well, you might have walked in at just the wrong moment and seen Tully. If he was there to be seen. Stop playing games, Trevor. Was he or wasn't he? Maybe he was both. It's one or the other, not necessarily. Just tell me, what did Dad want you to do? Your father, what a man, eh? What a piece of work, after all I've done for him, all I've put up with. He let Pam pull the plug on me. Can you beat that? He doesn't seem to realize how much he owes me. But for me, he would be... Trevor broke off and stared at me, sobered a little by the force of his feelings. Perhaps it's time you knew what kind of a father you've got, what he's capable of. What do you want you to do, Trevor? Help him. Trevor leaned closer still and lowered his voice to whisper, to bury Edmund Tully. The ugly farce of my non-appearance at Grant's party wasn't, as it turned out, at the bottom of the barrel. I had to scrape a little harder to find that. Halfway through the following winter, on a pouring wet day in Shaftesbury Avenue, it was mid-morning, but I was already drunk, standing in the refuge between two bollards in the middle of this road, waiting for the traffic to thin. I caught sight of my reflection in the window of a taxi as it came to halt in front of me, slowed by congestion ahead. I was looking even worse than usual, sodden by the rain, my face drawn, my eyes hollow, the flesh beneath them dark enough to have been charcoal. I looked at what I was, a man who lost his grip. Then I saw the passenger in the back of the taxi staring out at me in horror and amazement. It was Miv. She was every bit as beautiful as she'd ever been, and expensively groomed to boot. Her mouth fell open. She really was appalled. She sat forward in her seat and reached for the window, intending, I think, to lower it and speak to me. But at that moment the traffic eased. The taxi moved forward and she was gone, and I was left behind, leaning against a bollard for support as the rain sluiced down and shame lanced through me. In the months ahead, with the professional help I finally admitted to needing, I weaned myself off alcohol. I recalled the expression on Miv's face that day whenever I wanted to remind myself of the price of weakening. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, God knows, and relapses into the bad old ways and days. But eventually, by Christmas 1970, the season of every reformed alcoholic, several to tests, I could claim to have wrestled the habit into submission, even if kicking it altogether could only be as certain as how long had elapsed since the last drink. That had stretched to 3 years when, with Miv's help, I set up Napier's Classic Convertibles. I asked my father to put some money into it as well, but even though Grant's death the year before and his subsequent sale of the department stores had left him with more cash in hand than he knew what to do with, he refused, an act of meanness for which I was eventually grateful. Since moving to Pangbourne, I'd been making a living as a roving motor mechanic in the Thames Valley, repairing cars, vans, lorries, tractors, even combined harvesters. There was something wonderfully therapeutic about getting fouled old vehicles back on the road. My time with the Meteors hadn't done much for me, but the hours I'd put in their temperamental van paid off in the end. I began specializing in classic convertibles because they paid better and were more interesting than your average Ford Escort. I rented a workshop for a farm whose Land Rover I've nursed back to life on several occasions in order to tackle more ambitious jobs. Word of mouth and selective advertising brought me more and more customers. In 1973, I decided to make a proper business of it, and I never looked back until Pauline Lucas put a patch to what I'd spent all those years achieving, leaving me to scrabble through the wreckage in search of the truth about her, Michael Lanyon, and Edmund Tully. I knew where he was now. Trevor had told me, along with more, perhaps, than I really wanted to know. We'd left the Norway Inn and I'd driven him down to Falmouth, where he stopped in a deserted car, parked in the far tip of the Pendennis Point. We stepped out to the railings and leaned against them, staring into the damp, velvety night as the waves broke like a whispering chorus on the rocks below us. Then Trevor, sobered into coherence by the cool October air, but with resentment of his plight, still loosening his tongue, spit out his 12-year-old secret. It seems Michael Lanyon really was innocent. of murder anyway. He and Tully had been lovers at Oxford, and after I suppose Lanyon had written him some pretty explicit love letters, which Tully had hung onto. Down on his luck after the war, and knowing Lanyon was married and doing well, he decided to blackmail him with the letters. That's all. It was supposed to be extortion. Rather than have his wife learn the truth about him, Lanyon paid up to 500 quid easy money. But Tully had kept his ear to the ground while he was in Truro, and had learned that Joshua Carnwath was worth a bit and Michael Lanyon was the apple of his eye. So he decided to squeeze the old man as well. It wasn't love letters from Cordelia Lanyon to his father Tully put up for sale. It was a love letter from Michael to Tully himself. He'd kept some back just in case he needed to pull the same trick again later. But why wait when there was so much money sloshing around? Tully thought he'd hit the jackpot. But Uncle Joshua didn't play game. What? But Uncle Joshua didn't play ball? He was too hard for the game. I suppose you don't claw fortune out the Alaskan tundra only to land even a fraction of it over to a blackmailer. Seems Uncle Joshua told him to go to hell, and mentioned that Michael Lanyon would inherit his fortune one day, whether or not he'd been exposed as a homosexual in the meantime. Why did he make that point with the cloak then? Who knows? Maybe Tully's try-on prompted him to think about his will afresh, and he resolved to share his wealth more equally. He's not likely to have told Tully that, is he? And since he didn't live to keep the appointment, it's just so much speculation. And why did Tully kill him? Pure rage, apparently. Piqued at being turned down, he just lashed out, then fled the scene. And the letters? He left them at his lodgings, hidden under floorboards in his room, since the police never found them. I suppose there's a good chance they're still here, still there, wherever there is. Tully told Melvin he could retrieve them if he needed to, but I suppose that might have been a bluff. Why did he leave them behind? Because they linked him with the murderer, and because they undermined the story he dreamed up that night, the story he decided to tell if he was caught. Seems he had it in for Lanyon good and proper. It came down to envy. He knew Uncle Joshua's death made Lanyon a wealthy man, and he didn't fancy hanging with that to show for his efforts, so he cooked up an alternative motive, one that Lanyon came out of even worse than he did. He'd have preferred to get away scot-free, of course, but if that didn't prove possible, he could at least try to drag Lanyon down with him. And it worked, didn't it? Tully knew Lanyon could never bring himself to admit the truth. He wouldn't have been believed, even if he had, because naturally he'd already destroyed the letters Tully had sold him that left him with no plausible explanation for paying over the money in the first place. And then to cap it all, there was Sam Vigus, thanks to Gran. Yes, well, she was always one for corset and girdle, wasn't she? She had the money in her sights, and to do her justice, family believed Michael was guilty. Spicing up Vigus' testimony struck her devious mind as a sensible way of making absolutely certain Uncle Joshua's fortune stayed in the family. Only Tully didn't hang, did he? And Tully was well placed to know Vigus had lied. Gran was certainly angry about Tully's reprieve, because she was afraid her distortion of the evidence would come back to haunt her, just as it did a few days before her 90th birthday. You're saying Tully contacted Gran? No, it was Melvin he went to. The man with most to lose. Tully phoned him and set up a meeting in Boscawen Park. That's when he revealed what had really happened back in 47, and what he was willing to do if Melvin didn't pay him the small matter of 100,000 quid to make himself scarce. Spill the beans to the Lanyon. Exactly. Tully had it all worked out. He'd been studying the law while he was in prison, and reckoned that if he could convince the authorities he'd frame Lanyon, they'd have to grant the poor bastard a posthumous pardon that would invalidate the grounds on which Uncle Joshua will had been set aside, and mean his estate had to revert to the heirs of the original beneficiary. Are you with me, Chris? The house, the money, the whole lot will go back to Lanyon's, together with compensation, damages, and God knows what. Is that true? You'll need to consult a lawyer for a definitive answer. It sounds convincing enough to Melvin, though, especially since he was harbouring a guilty secret about the evidence that had sent Michael Lanyon to the gallows in the first place. Gran had told him all about it. He knew what she'd done. It hadn't seemed so bad when you could argue it was all a good cause. But if Tully carried out his threat, they might find themselves charged with us conspiring to pervert the course of justice and bankrupt into the bargain. But Tully would have gone back to prison if he'd been lying at the trial. True, but he said that he would be water off a duck's back to an old lag like him, and would have taken a steelier nerve than Melvin to call his bluff. So Dad agreed. Yes, Tully gave him 48 hours to get the money together. The handover was fixed for Friday afternoon in the car park at St. Earth railway station. St. Earth was a junction most of the way down the main line to Penzance, where passengers changed for the St. Ives branch. Guessing I'd be puzzled by the choice of rendezvous, Trevor explained. Tully didn't want to hang around Truro in case he was recognised. He was planning to stay in Penzance until Friday and pick up the money en route to London. So Earth's pretty much deserted between trains, and the car park isn't overlooked by houses, making it a nice discreet setting. It suited Melbourne too. He didn't want to be seen consorting with a convicted murderer. He even borrowed my car to drive down there, feeding me a cock and bull story about the Daimler's starting motor being on the blink. You had no idea what was going on, not the foggiest. I still hadn't been dragged into it. He told Gran. Of course, she was all for defying Tully to do his worst. Like brother, like sister, I suppose. Melbourne talked her around in the end, and she stumped up the cash. He left the office after lunch, supposedly to play golf. Instead, he drove to St. Earth and met Tully off the train. It should have been a straightforward transaction, over and done within minutes, but something went wrong. What? They were standing in the back of the car, apparently, with the boot open and the bag containing the money inside. Tully was checking it, slowly and methodically. There was nobody around. The London train was long gone, and so were the few other passengers who got off. They had the place more or less to themselves. Melvin was watching Tully, fingering his way through the wads of notes, wondering if he'd ever finish. Eventually he did. It seems to be all here, he announced, and very nice to be going on with. Who knows what he really meant? It could have been a hint. He'd be back for more later. Certainly Melvin took it that way. Well, you know how short-tempered he is. Something snapped just like that. He paused. Hit you much as a child did he? Off and on, but not with a wheel wrench over the back of the head, I imagine. Good God, are you saying? He gave Tully a whack with the first thing that came to hand, a wheel wrench. Tully fell forward into the boot, out cold. Melvin panicked as you would. He bounded Tully's legs in and after him, closed the boot and drove off, hoping nobody had seen what he'd done. A few miles down the road, he pulled into a farm gateway and got out to check how Tully was. And he was dead. Had been since the wrench struck him at the base of the skull. Seems Melvin should have been in the commanders rather than in the catering corps. My God, I never have thought him capable of it. No, neither would I. Neither would he, I suspect, but he was, and it could only get worse before it got better. You can't exactly ignore a dead body in the boot of your car, can you? Not for long, anyway. So what did he do? Drove back to Truro like a bat out of hell and told Gran what had happened, hoping he'd snap her fingers and make the body disappear. Instead, she told him to snap his and get me over there for the store sharpish. She reckoned it would take two of us to bury him. Just think, if you had made it to Truro in time, you could have taken up my place and been welcome to it. If you think, no, Chris, I don't. I expect you have called the police and happily seen your father sent to prison, your sister and niece turned out of house and home, and Napier's department stores renamed Nanions overnight. But I don't have your finely chiseled moral sensibility. I wasn't exactly enthusiastic about what Melvin wanted me to do, but in the final analysis, I couldn't see we had much choice. Tully was dead, but nobody was going to miss him or come looking for him, and he was a murderer. Let's not forget that, of Michael Lanyon as well as Joshua Connworth. We couldn't leave him where he was. We either went to the police or where did you bury him? Bishop's Wood late that night while we were supposed to be wining and dining our supplier in Plymouth. Backbreaking work. I don't mind telling you, we'd had quite a bit of rain in the previous week, so the ground was fairly soft. But even so, Trevor sighed. I'd had a healthy respect for grave diggers ever since. They're scandalously underpaid. You think this is a joking matter? I certainly didn't think at the time. I thought it was a waking nightmare. If you want to know the truth, I thought your father had dragged me into an even deeper hole than the one we had to dig for Tully. I was frightened enough to tell him exactly how I felt. That's what Tabs walked into the middle of. But it didn't change anything. We had to go through with it or face some pretty hideous consequence. Tully's body was in my car, remember? Melvin never said as much, but there was a hint that he might try to saddle me with the blame if we push came to shove. But we got away with it, didn't we? Nobody saw us, nobody suspected a thing, and nobody ever unearthed Edmund Tully. Is that supposed to justify what you did? Don't get sanctimonious with me. I was just helping to clear up the mess. Your family's mess. Remember that. I didn't help convict an innocent man. I didn't murder anyone. Your grandmother did one, and your father the other. They're the ones to blame, not me. And you'll profit by their crimes eventually. Remember that as well. I've no doubt you've got a lucrative mention in Melvin's will, but I won't. You can be sure that as things have turned out, it looks like I strained every nerve and sinew, planting Tully 6 feet under that night in Bishop's Wood for precisely no personal gain whatsoever. What do you want? My sympathy? It wouldn't go, miss. But don't worry, I'm not expecting you to clap me on the back and say, nice one, Drew. You did what you had to be done. I'm proud of you. I don't even expect you to acknowledge that it was a bloody awful fix to find myself in. But you could satisfy my curiosity on one point. Now you know what really happened. What are you going to do about it? What exactly are you going to do? Ellie, Gran had muttered to me on her deathbed at Trudeau House in February 1972. Ellie, and now the interpretation of her faltering farewell had changed. He changed again. He lies. Was that it? He lies in Bishop's Wood. It could have been. It certainly could. Bishop's Wood fills a trench at the valley of the River Allens above Isles, a few miles north of Truro. There's an Iron Age fort preserved in the middle of it, which Nick and I used to defend against Roman soldiers whenever we strayed that far on all-day rambles from Truro. By night it would be a dark and secret place where the desperate and determined could bury a dead man in the realistic hope that he'll never be discovered. He was a short, thin old man, Trevor had said, but still it was almost too much for us, carrying him to a hole that had taken us hours to dig. Then the filling in and covering up, the camouflage with leaves by failing torchlight. God, it was one hell of a business. That last I could easily believe. The consequence of murder often are. They seemed to me as I drove back alone to Truro after dropping Trevor at the True Mouth Motel. An innocent man hanged, his son driven to suicide, his daughter to the twilight life of a fugitive from her own identity. And after it all, just one question to answer. What exactly are you going to do? I didn't sleep much that day. I lay in bed wondering what I'd done if I learnt the truth while Nicky was still alive. I wanted to believe I'd have told him everything and given him the proof he craved of his father's innocence. But would I? Would I really? When there was so much at stake, I was far angrier with Dad for covering up Gran's responsibility for Michael Lanyon's conviction than I was with the murder of Edmund Tully. I found that quite forgivable. I was almost glad he'd done it. Glad the man who should have hanged in 1947 had gone on to meet a violent death and been buried in unhallowed ground. But murder was murder. To reveal one part of the truth was to reveal all. Maybe even Nicky could have heard me. I'd have stayed silent. It was to reject that notion, to distance myself from what my own flesh and blood had done to his flesh and blood, that I left the hotel before dawn next morning and drove out to Idless. I watched a cloud-streaked sunrise over the enfolding green hills that rolled away beyond Bishop's Wood towards St. Austell, and ran it all over my mind until I was sure what I had to do. Then I rang Emma from the telephone box in the village. She sounded as if she wasn't properly awake. But what I said soon aroused her into alertness. Can you take the day off work and come down to Cornwall? What, just like that? It's important, just as important as it would be. Well, I suppose I could go sick, but do it. Believe me, Emma, it's why do you come? All right then, her voice altered. I will. There's a train from Paddington at 7:40. Can you be on it? Just about. Buy a single to St. Earth. I'll meet you there. St. Earth, why not Truro? You'll understand when you get there, I promise you, Emma. Pretty soon you'll understand everything. Thank you for listening.